They used to enter without a visa, no embassy lines, no expensive paperwork, just an ETA, a boarding pass, and they were cleared for Canada. But in 2025, that's changing fast. So why is Canada suddenly pulling the plug on visa-free travel for some Asian countries? Is it politics, border control, abuse of trust, or something deeper? Canada's immigration system is under pressure, and the visa exemption list is getting a serious update. If your country's on this list, the easy days are over. Let's break down the 10 Asian countries Canada will ban from visa-free entry in 2025 and what pushed them over the edge. Number 10. Kazakhstan. You probably don't hear much about Kazakhstan in global travel headlines. And that's exactly why this might shock you. Quiet, vast, and resource-rich, Kazakhstan has long enjoyed a reputation as Central Asia's sleeping giant. But beneath the surface, something's shifting, and not in a good way. In 2025, Canada is expected to tighten its entry rules, and Kazakhstan is one of the countries likely to lose visa-free access. So what's behind the change? It's not politics, it's paperwork. Over the last 3 years, Canadian border officials have reported a sharp rise in visa violations and forged travel documents connected to travelers originating from Kazakhstan. Even more concerning, an increasing number of travelers from this region are using third-country stopovers to mask their real routes, making them harder to track and vet properly. But that's not all. Law enforcement agencies have flagged a trend of so-called economic overstays, where visitors arrive legally but disappear into under-the-table job markets, especially in sectors like agriculture, cleaning, and construction. Canada's immigration system wasn't built to absorb hidden flows like this, and now the pressure is mounting. You might ask, how serious can it be? Here's the kicker. Some immigration analysts have linked fraudulent applications from Kazakhstan to wider Central Asian smuggling networks. Whether or not every traveler is guilty, the damage is reputational, and Canada's system runs on trust. When that trust erodes, doors close. Number 9, India. It's the world's largest democracy, a rising tech powerhouse, and home to over 1 billion people. But in 2025, Canada might say, not without a visa. India, once seen as a growing partner in global mobility, is now under serious scrutiny, and the consequences could hit hard. You'd be surprised how many Indian travelers currently use the ETA system to visit Canada for business, tourism, or family reasons. But here's the issue. Canada's immigration authorities have seen a massive spike in asylum claims from Indian nationals, particularly from Punjab and Haryana, many of whom entered through visa-free programs and then never left. But it doesn't stop there. India now ranks among the top countries for visa overstays and work violations. From students who never show up to class to tourists who vanish into underground job markets, the pattern is starting to look less like coincidence and more like systemic abuse. What really pushed things over the edge? Some officials point to the strain on Canada's refugee processing system, which is now overloaded, with Indian applicants taking up a significant share. Combined with growing concerns over fraudulent documents, mismatched identities, and even ghost colleges in the student visa stream, the trust that once allowed smoother entry is now on life support. Number 8, Indonesia. It's the world's 4th most populous country, a paradise of islands and culture, and a growing player in Southeast Asia. But here's the twist. In 2025, Canada may pull Indonesia off the visa-free list, and most people won't see it coming. So what changed? On paper, Indonesia looks stable. Rising economy, strong diplomatic ties, and a booming tourism sector. But behind the beach photos and travel blogs lies a growing problem: visa abuse at scale. Over the last few years, Canadian authorities have flagged a disturbing pattern. Indonesian travelers entering on ETA or short-term visas increasingly overstay their welcome, often disappearing into informal labor sectors. And here's the kicker. Unlike some countries that have high overstay rates but low overall volumes, Indonesia's numbers are both large and rising. This puts serious pressure on immigration enforcement, social services, and, most critically, the trust system behind visa exemptions. But that's not the only red flag. Canada's intelligence community has quietly raised concerns about ID falsification and smuggling rings operating between Southeast Asia and the West Coast. While not all of these are linked to Indonesia directly, the country's porous borders and document laxity make it a soft entry point, and that makes policymakers nervous. Number 7. Pakistan. It's a nation with deep historical ties to Canada, a large diaspora, and a presence felt in cities from Toronto to Vancouver. But in 2025, Pakistan may find itself on the outside looking in, as Canada moves to revoke its visa-free entry privileges. Why now? The answer is layered and urgent. Over the past decade, Pakistan has ranked consistently high in the number of asylum seekers arriving in Canada under short-term entry programs. Many enter legally with travel authorizations, then file for refugee status, often citing political or religious persecution. Some are valid, many are not. And here's where it gets complicated. Canada's immigration courts are overwhelmed, and Pakistani applicants now account for a disproportionate share of the backlog. Delays stretch into years, costs balloon, and the entire system starts to buckle. But that's just the beginning. Intelligence assessments have raised serious concerns about background check limitations. Weak institutional record keeping in parts of Pakistan means that verifying an applicant's identity, criminal history, or intent becomes a near impossible task. Add to that reports of radicalization routes and passport fraud, and the trust that once formed the backbone of entry policy begins to erode fast. But here's the real shock. Some provinces in Canada are now actively lobbying the federal government to tighten entry restrictions, citing strain on local shelters, legal aid, and housing systems. Number 6. Vietnam. It's one of Asia's fastest-growing economies, a rising hub of tech and manufacturing, but also a country quietly slipping down Canada's trust list. In 2025, Vietnam could lose its visa-free status with Canada, and here's why that matters more than most people think. At first glance, Vietnam seems like a model of international cooperation. Trade is booming, students are enrolling in Canadian universities in record numbers, and tourism has flourished. But dig deeper, and cracks begin to show. Over the past 5 years, Canada has seen a notable spike in visa overstays and immigration violations involving Vietnamese nationals, especially in student and temporary worker categories. But the real concern? A growing network of fraudulent education agents and document forgers operating between Vietnam and Canada. These networks recruit applicants under fake enrollment schemes, submit falsified financials, and exploit Canada's streamlined ETA process. The result? Travelers who never attend school, never leave the country, and often disappear into unregulated labor. And here's the twist. Many of these violations aren't immediately detected. Vietnamese travelers often enter with all the correct paperwork, but the long-term pattern shows a different story. Low return rates, untracked employment, sudden address disappearances. Number 5. Philippines. It's one of Canada's closest allies in Asia, with over 900,000 Filipinos living across the country, from caregivers and nurses to engineers and students. But despite these strong ties, the Philippines may be the next to lose visa-free access to Canada in 2025. And the reason isn't emotional, it's statistical. Back in 2023, Canada extended ETA eligibility to Filipino citizens under one condition. They must either hold a valid U.S. visa or have held a Canadian visa in the last 10 years. It was seen as a gesture of goodwill, a recognition of cultural ties and trust. But within months, cracks started to appear. Here's what Canadian officials didn't anticipate: the volume. Applications surged. Thousands of new travelers began arriving with minimal screening. And soon after, reports of increased overstays, unauthorized work, and misuse of visitor permits started rolling in. But that's just the surface. Immigration enforcement agencies have flagged a worrying trend: visa hopping behavior, where travelers use the U.S. visa as a backdoor to gain ETA entry into Canada, only to disappear from official records weeks later. Even more alarming is the rise in fraudulent documents coming from certain visa brokers in Manila and Cebu. Fake employment histories, doctored financials, and manipulated travel records are now showing up in applications flagged for secondary review. And here's the breaking point. Provincial governments in Canada, especially in housing-strained regions like British Columbia and Ontario, are warning of unsustainable pressure on shelters and social support services, fueled in part by these entry loopholes. Number 4, Iran. It's a country that rarely leaves the headlines, and not always for the right reasons. In 2025, Iran is expected to face even tighter travel restrictions, and visa-free access to Canada may soon be off the table entirely. But this time, it's not just about immigration, it's about national security. Let's be clear, Iranian citizens are not the problem, but their government's actions are changing everything. In the past few years, diplomatic relations between Canada and Iran have deteriorated to historic lows. Embassies are closed, dialogue is frozen, and cooperation on security matters nearly non-existent. That matters, because Canada's visa-free or simplified entry systems rely on information sharing. When there's no channel to verify identity, criminal background, or purpose of travel, trust disappears. And for Iranian travelers, that lack of state-level transparency has created an environment of constant suspicion. But there's more. Intelligence services have flagged cases of dual-use travelers, individuals entering as tourists, but engaging in illicit procurement, surveillance, or political activity. Add to that a rising number of refugee claims based on religious and political persecution, and the picture becomes clearer. Canada is struggling to distinguish between genuine visitors and potential threats. And here's the real trigger. Recent reports suggest that organized networks in the region are exploiting weak third-country borders to facilitate Iranian travel through indirect routes, often masking travel histories and forging supporting documents. When systems like ETA can't account for that, they break. Number 3, Sri Lanka. It's an island of breathtaking landscapes, rich heritage, and post-war resilience. But in 2020, Sri Lanka may face a travel reality check as Canada moves to revoke simplified entry options and reintroduce full visa controls. Why? Because quiet patterns are starting to speak loudly. At first glance, Sri Lankan tourism doesn't raise red flags. Visitor numbers are moderate, student migration is steady, and bilateral relations are generally calm. But over the past few years, Canadian immigration officials have begun to notice a subtle shift. A rise in short-term visa overstays, particularly in labor-heavy regions like Ontario and Alberta. It's not about volume, it's about intent. Many Sri Lankan visitors, especially those entering on ETA or tourist pathways, are using their temporary status as a bridge into the underground job market. From construction to elder care, illegal employment is rising, and it's quietly reshaping how Sri Lankan mobility is viewed. But here's where things get more complex. Canadian authorities are reporting increasing cases of asylum applications filed after arrival, citing economic instability or ethnic discrimination. Some are credible, others are vague, inconsistent, or part of a broader trend of visa-to-refugee conversion that's placing heavy strain on Canada's asylum system. And then comes the document concern. Fraudulent birth certificates, inconsistent travel histories, and unverifiable financial statements are becoming more frequent in applications originating from Sri Lanka. Immigration risk assessments now place the country in a moderate to high concern bracket, a status that often precedes restrictions. Number 2. China. It's a global superpower, a tech and trade titan, and one of Canada's largest economic partners. But when it comes to immigration trust, the landscape is shifting fast. In 2025, China may be next to lose visa-free privileges, not because of tourism, but because of politics, pressure, and growing paranoia. Let's get one thing straight. Millions of Chinese travelers follow the rules, spend generously, and return home as expected. But Canada's immigration system doesn't just deal in averages, it deals in risk. And lately, the risks are stacking up. The big issue? Espionage concerns. Canadian intelligence agencies have openly warned about foreign influence operations, cyber infiltration, and covert surveillance tied to actors linked with the Chinese state. These aren't conspiracy theories. They're outlined in national security briefings. And when that suspicion creeps into immigration, the whole system tightens. But that's not all. The student visa stream has come under fire as well. Reports of enrollment in ghost colleges, forged transcripts, and academic fraud have triggered deep reviews of Chinese applications, especially in tech-heavy fields like engineering and AI. Some universities are now flagging applicants preemptively for secondary checks. Meanwhile, there's the issue of internal political pressure. After a string of diplomatic standoffs, including the Huawei controversy, election interference claims, and tit-for-tat expulsions, Canada is under pressure to show it's not bending to foreign influence. That means clamping down where it hurts: access. And here's the final blow. Low transparency and weak exit tracking on the Chinese side make it nearly impossible for Canadian officials to verify travel histories or detect overstays in real time. Number 1. Afghanistan. It's a nation torn by conflict, displacement, and decades of instability. And in 2025, Afghanistan is expected to face the most severe entry restrictions yet, as Canada prepares to completely shut down any remaining visa-free pathways, even the humanitarian ones. You might ask, weren't they already limited? Yes, but the shift now is total. Canada, once among the leading resettlement destinations for Afghan refugees, is moving to seal off all simplified travel routes, citing unmanageable risk, documentation breakdown, and a lack of verifiable data. Here's the core problem: state collapse. Since the Taliban returned to power, Canada no longer recognizes the de facto Afghan government, and with no formal diplomatic ties, there is no trusted authority to verify passport legitimacy, criminal records, or even basic identity. But it doesn't stop there. Intelligence briefings have warned of security risks associated with unvetted migration flows. With extremist groups active in the region and border enforcement effectively paralyzed, there's growing fear that individuals with unknown affiliations could exploit humanitarian channels to gain access. And here's what makes it worse: document fraud has surged. Fake passports, forged refugee IDs, and third-country transit scams have become common, with Afghan nationals entering through loosely controlled routes in Central and South Asia, often presenting conflicting stories and unverifiable backgrounds. Canada's immigration infrastructure isn't built to absorb that volume of uncertainty, not when the stakes include both public safety and international obligation.